The day they bulldozed my great-grandfather's bridge was the day I decided to turn their $4 million lakefront resort into a muddy parking lot. It was 6 in the morning, the kind of foggy Texas dawn when the lake looks like glass and the air smells like wet cedar and diesel from old fishing boats. I was sitting on my dock with a cup of strong coffee, watching the mist drift off the water when the rumble started. A deep, mechanical growl that didn't belong to the quiet mornings I loved. Through the haze, I saw a bulldozer crawling toward the stone bridge my great-grandfather built with his own hands back in 1923. The same bridge that had connected our side of the lake to the main road for a century. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake. Nobody would just tear down something that had stood for generations. But then I saw her, Linda Prescott, standing there in her spotless white heels and pearls, clipboard in hand, directing the whole thing like she was building a shopping mall. My stomach turned. That bridge wasn't just stone and mortar, it was family, it was memory. It was the reason my wife Sarah and I had dreamed of retiring here, and now it was rubble under Linda's orders. Linda had been the HOA president for barely a year, but she acted like she owned the whole lake. Whispering Pines was her empire, a luxury community full of shiny new houses and people who thought money meant authority. She'd moved in from Dallas 2 years ago, took over the HOA within 6 months, and started modernizing everything. Translation: anything old, anything with character, had to go. The sound of the bulldozer's blade against limestone still rings in my ears. The bridge cracked like a gunshot, and chunks of my great-grandfather's work tumbled into the water below. I remember the taste of coffee turning bitter in my mouth and the smell of dust mixing with lake mist. I didn't shout or run down there. I just stood frozen, the mug shaking in my hand. Linda called up to me, her voice sharp and chipper. "Good morning, Mr. Morrison. We're finally cleaning up that old eyesore. Progress, right?" Progress, that's what she called it. But what Linda Prescott didn't know, and what would soon ruin her empire, was that my great-grandfather hadn't just built that bridge. He'd also built the dam that controlled this entire lake, and when he died, those water rights passed to his descendants. Which means they passed to me. The next day, I started digging through my grandfather's old records. The attic smelled like dust and mothballs, full of wooden crates and brittle papers that hadn't been touched in decades. I spent hours hunched over a desk, tracing faded ink with my finger. The bridge blueprints. Deed maps. County water records. And there it was, clear as day. Samuel Morrison, 1923. Secondary Water Management Authority, Lake Morrison System. That night, I told Sarah everything. She sat at our kitchen table, her blonde hair tied back, her face pale under the warm yellow light. "You mean you can control the lake?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "Every inch of it." She stared at me for a long moment, then said, "Jake, don't do anything stupid." But this wasn't about stupid. This was about respect. The following week, I went to the HOA meeting. The community center smelled like floor wax, burnt coffee, and perfume. Folding chairs lined up in rows, and a cheap projector hummed at the front. Linda was already there, surrounded by her little circle of board members, men in pressed golf shirts, and women who smelled like new money. When it was my turn to speak, I laid my documents on the table like a royal flush. "My bridge predates your HOA by 80 years, I said. "You had no authority to touch it. I have legal water rights that supersede your covenants." Linda barely glanced at the papers. "Times change, Mr. Morrison. Progress requires sacrifice." Her voice was syrup-sweet, but her eyes were pure steel. "That bridge was unsafe and unsightly. We're creating a better community here." The vote was quick, 5-2 in favor of enforcement. My bridge, gone for good. Walking out, the air felt thick, heavy with something that wasn't just anger. It was resolve. Gravel crunched under my boots, and the scent of gasoline from the HOA trucks lingered like an insult. That's when I made my decision. If Linda wanted a war, she'd get one, but it would be fought with documents, valves, and the quiet force of water itself. The harassment started the next morning. Two guys in matching polo shirts showed up at my gate holding clipboards. HOA Compliance Patrol. One said, like it was some kind of federal badge. Documenting violations. They listed everything: grass too long, shed paint fading, mailbox not the right shade of black. Even my fishing net was visible from the road. I laughed at first. Then the fines started coming. $500, then $800, then over $1, $200. Sarah tried to stay calm. "We'll fight it," she said, squeezing my hand. "You've got proof." I nodded, but inside I was boiling. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the pines and the cicadas sang like static electricity, I opened my laptop and started researching. Water rights in Texas. HOA overreach. Dam control regulations. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. Linda Prescott had made a fatal mistake. She thought this was about aesthetics, about control, about her version of progress. She had no idea she'd picked a fight with an engineer who understood every inch of that lake better than she ever would. 2 weeks later, I stood on the dam itself, wind whipping across the surface, the scent of algae and cold steel filling my lungs. My great-grandfather's hand-chiseled initials were still visible on the old concrete, SM 1923. I placed my palm on them and whispered, "I'll handle it, Grandpa." Because when they tore down that bridge, they didn't just destroy stone. They awakened something older, deeper, and far more powerful than any HOA bylaw, family legacy, and a man who knew exactly how to make the water obey. 3 days after the bulldozer flattened my great-grandfather's bridge, 2 white SUVs rolled up to my gate again. The same HOA Compliance Patrol, as they called themselves, but this time they brought cameras. One of them, a thick-necked guy with mirrored sunglasses, filmed every inch of my property like he was building a case for the Supreme Court. The other scribbled notes while pretending not to notice my coffee mug shaking in my hand. "Morning, Mr. Morrison," the first one said with a fake smile. "We're here to document additional violations." "Violations?" I asked. "Like what? Breathing too loud?" "Mailbox color doesn't meet current aesthetic standards," he read from his clipboard. "Also, your grass height exceeds the approved limit by 2 inches. Oh, and that old dock's due for repainting." He looked proud of himself, like he was saving the world one chipped board at a time. By the end of that week, I had 7 new citations, totaling nearly $2,000 in fines. The letters arrived in thick envelopes that smelled faintly of Linda's expensive perfume. Sarah opened one, read it, and slammed it onto the counter. "They're not stopping," she said. "They won't stop until you break." That night I didn't sleep. I just stared at the old photos hanging above our fireplace. My great-grandfather standing beside the bridge in his overalls. My dad fishing with me when I was 10. The water calm and bright behind us. Everything good in our family had started with that lake. I decided to stop reacting and start investigating. The next morning, I visited the county clerk's office. The place smelled like old carpet and toner ink, and the clerk behind the counter had glasses so thick they magnified his eyes. Water records, dam operations, ownership transfers, anything under Morrison, Samuel, I told him. He shuffled through dusty drawers and returned with 3 fat folders that looked like they hadn't been touched in half a century. When I opened them, the smell of old paper hit me hard, like earth and history. Inside were maps, blueprints, and legal documents that spelled out exactly what I'd hoped. My great-grandfather had never transferred control of the dam. The HOA didn't own it. They just assumed they did. That night, Sarah found me at the dining table surrounded by stacks of documents. She brushed her fingers over the faded signatures. "Jake," she said softly, "what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking Linda has no idea what kind of problem she just created." Quote, Linda, meanwhile, was busy tightening her grip on the neighborhood. Rumors started spreading like wildfire. People stopped waving when I drove by. Mrs. Patterson from the flower shop wouldn't even make eye contact with Sarah at the grocery store. At the diner, 2 old-timers whispered loud enough for me to hear. "That bridge guy's trouble." Gonna tank property values. I knew exactly where the whispers came from. Linda was poisoning the well, figuratively this time. The following week, a county inspector showed up at my door with a clipboard and a tired look on his face. "Anonymous complaint," he said. "Something about structural instability on your bridge." I laughed. "You're a little late. They already tore it down." He sighed, embarrassed. "Then I guess I'm here to make sure the debris isn't a hazard." While he worked, I noticed something stamped on his paperwork, a referral from Prescott Construction. Linda's husband's company, the same man who ran the HOA's security contracts. I asked the inspector casually, "Who authorized the review?" He hesitated. "Came from the HOA office. They said your bridge needed to meet seismic standards. Offered me a quote from Prescott Construction, $12,000 for reinforcement." I thanked him, then went straight inside to my laptop. Within 10 minutes, I found what I needed. Rick Prescott's contractor license had expired 2 years ago. He was doing illegal work under his wife's HOA contracts. By the next morning, I had copies of every violation, every license record, every misused HOA check. I organized them like ammunition. Still, I knew Linda wouldn't go down easy. She had money, lawyers, and influence. I had knowledge, and a dam, so I drove out to the dam that afternoon. The air smelled like rust and wet earth. The sound of the spillway rushing below echoed like a heartbeat through the concrete. My great-grandfather's initials, S. M. 1923, were carved into the side, barely visible through moss. I ran my hand over the old letters and whispered, "Guess it's time to remind them who really owns this place." When I returned home, Sarah was waiting on the porch. Her arms were crossed, her expression tight. "You're planning something, aren't you?" "I'm planning justice," I said quietly. "Not revenge, justice." The next HOA meeting was standing room only. Linda sat at the front like a queen on her throne, her pearl necklace gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Her voice carried that polished confidence of someone used to winning. "Mr. Morrison," she said sweetly when I walked in, "perhaps you'd like to discuss your ongoing violations." I smiled and set my stack of folders on the table. "Actually, I'd like to discuss yours." The room went silent. I opened the first folder. County records showing expired licenses, misused HOA funds, and unpermitted structures on Linda's own property. The crowd leaned forward. "Your deck?" I said. "No permit." "Your pool house?" 6 inches over the setback line. "And your precious Japanese garden?" 3 feet onto my land. Linda's face drained of color. Her manicured hand gripped the table so tight her knuckles turned white. "You're bluffing," she hissed. I slid the property map toward her. "County survey says otherwise." The room erupted in murmurs. I could feel the shift, the first crack in her empire, but Linda wasn't finished. Her voice snapped like ice. "We'll see about that. The board votes tonight to remove your bridge permanently. Demolition starts tomorrow at 9 a.m. "Without my consent?" I asked. "Progress requires sacrifice," she said again, that same condescending tone that burned into my memory. Walking out of that meeting, the night air felt colder than usual. Crickets chirped somewhere in the distance, and I could smell rain in the wind. Sarah called after me, "Jake, please don't do something crazy." I turned to her, my jaw set. "They took down our bridge, Sarah. They took down 100 years of our family's history. Tomorrow, they're going to learn what happens when you build your empire on someone else's water." By sunrise, I was standing at the dam again. The wheel that controlled the secondary flow channels gleamed faintly under the morning light. I gripped it with both hands. The steel was cold and heavy, humming with age and potential. It wouldn't take much, just a few turns. Enough to remind Linda and her HOA board what real control looked like. And as the first rays of sunlight hit the lake, I whispered to the wind, "You want progress? Let's make some." Friday morning broke clear and sharp, the kind of Texas morning where the sky looks like glass and every sound travels for miles. The air smelled of damp cedar and gasoline from distant boats. I stood on my porch sipping black coffee when the first sheriff's cruiser rolled up. 2 more followed close behind. blue lights flashing silently. And then came Linda Prescott. She stepped out of her spotless white BMW like she was walking onto a movie set, her pearl necklace gleaming, sunglasses hiding the fury in her eyes. Behind her trailed two men in dark suits carrying briefcases, probably lawyers flown in from Dallas to save her crumbling empire. "Mr. Morrison," one of the deputies said carefully, his hat tucked under his arm, "we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of criminal threatening and conspiracy to commit environmental terrorism." Quote. Sarah gasped behind me. "What? That's insane!" I kept my voice steady. "You're arresting me for protecting my family's property?" The deputy gave a small shrug, almost apologetic. "Orders from above, sir." 2 hours later, I was sitting in my attorney Patricia Gomez's Austin office, the scent of strong coffee mixing with old paper. Patricia was calm, sharp, the kind of lawyer who looked like she'd been born in a courtroom. She skimmed through the federal restraining order and smiled faintly. "Jake, they made a massive mistake. This order acknowledges your family's water rights. That's federal recognition." I frowned. Meaning? Meaning we can now take this fight to federal court, where water law beats HOA politics every single time. By that evening, Patricia had filed a counter-injunction under the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899. Legally, I was reinstated as the dam's water management authority. Linda's so-called victory had just handed us the weapon we needed. But Linda didn't know how to quit. That weekend, news trucks lined our street. Cameras, microphones, headlines. Local man accused of threatening resort water supply. On TV, Linda appeared perfectly composed, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. "We're simply trying to protect our families from a dangerous man who thinks he's above the law," she said to a reporter. I watched her performance from my living room, the glow of the TV flickering against the walls. Outside, neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Sarah sat beside me, her hand cold in mine. "They're painting you as some kind of villain," she whispered. "Good," I said quietly. "Let them. Because when the truth comes out, it'll hit twice as hard." The next morning, I got a call that changed everything. Frank Wilson, the old dam operator who'd worked this system longer than anyone alive, sounded weary but firm. "Jake, I'm done with this circus. I'm retiring effective immediately, and I'm recommending you as interim dam operator under your family's rights." "Frank, you sure about this?" Quote. "Never been more sure. Time for the lake to remember who really runs it." Quote. With that, I became the official dam operator. Linda's private security, her board, her lawyers, none of them could stop me now. Later that day, Tom Rodriguez called, voice trembling with both fear and excitement. "Jake, I've got proof." Linda tried to bribe me. 15 grand to make it look like you sabotaged the dam. I recorded the whole thing. That was the final nail in her coffin. Patricia forwarded the recording to the county sheriff and local press. Within hours, half the community had turned on Linda. The same people who once whispered about me being unstable were now whispering about her criminal investigation. Tuesday morning dawned bright and cold. The kind of morning that tastes like steel and carries the smell of coming rain. I drove to the dam with Patricia, Frank, and a small army of reporters. News vans, microphones, and cameras lined the gravel road. Sheriff Martinez was there too, looking tired but curious. Linda had brought her own entourage, 3 lawyers, a handful of board members, and her private guards. She stood blocking the path to the control wheel, her voice trembling with rage. "You will not touch that valve! This is private property!" Patricia stepped forward, handing a document to the sheriff. "Federal authorization, sir. Mr. Morrison is the legally recognized dam operator under the Morrison Water Rights of 1923. The sheriff skimmed it, nodded once, and stepped aside. "Ma'am, you'll need to move." Linda's eyes widened. "You can't be serious!" "I'm dead serious," the sheriff replied. "You've overstepped." The camera zoomed in. I walked past Linda, the crunch of gravel under my boots echoing like gunfire. I could smell the perfume she'd doused herself in. Sweet, sharp, desperate. "Mr. Morrison," a reporter called out, "what exactly are you doing?" I knelt by the ancient control housing, my fingers tracing the worn brass of the old wheel. "I'm performing routine maintenance," I said evenly. "My great-grandfather built this dam to be self-regulating. I'm just reminding it how to breathe." The first turn of the wheel was smooth, almost too smooth. Deep inside the dam, ancient gears groaned awake after decades of silence. A low rumble rolled through the earth. The crowd fell completely silent, except for the steady churn of water. Linda screamed, "He's draining our lake! Stop him!" Sheriff Martinez didn't even flinch. "He's acting within federal authority, ma'am." Water surged through the bypass channels, foaming and roaring as it carved a path downstream. Within minutes, the lake level began to drop. The polished wooden docks of the resort tilted, creaked, and then grounded on the mud below. Linda's voice broke into a sob. "You can't do this! You're ruining everything!" I stood, facing her across the roaring water. "You ruined everything when you destroyed that bridge. You called it progress. This is progress too, just the kind you can't control." Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. "Mr. Morrison, are you trying to destroy the resort?" one asked. "No," I said simply. "I'm restoring balance." By sunset, the resort's million-dollar docks sat in cracked mud. Their grand opening was canceled, investors panicked, and the bank called their loan. Within weeks, Linda and her husband were under investigation for fraud and misuse of community funds. Their empire collapsed faster than the waterline. But the lake recovered, as water always does. The new HOA president, Mrs. Chen, reached out with a handshake and a proposal: make the Morrison Bridge a historic landmark, protect the dam, and turn our story into a community symbol instead of a feud. Today, the lake sparkles brighter than ever. My great-grandfather's bridge has been rebuilt with care, every limestone block restored by local hands. There's a plaque now that reads, "Built by Samuel Morrison, 1923, preserved by his family." Every spring, kids from the nearby school come for the annual Bridge Day Festival. They learn about water rights, history, and how one family stood up to protect their legacy. Sarah and I walk hand in hand across that bridge every evening, the sound of lapping water below as peaceful as it was 100 years ago. Sometimes, when the sun hits the dam just right, I swear I can almost see my great-grandfather standing there, grinning in his work clothes, proud as ever. And I whisper the same words I told him that morning on the dock. "I handled it, Grandpa.